Steve Cooper, Rank Success, and this is another short book review covering material that you might find helpful as part of your reflection and preparation for a promotion process, a police promotion process, and if you aspire to a formal leadership position. So for me, I'm always looking for stories that motivate and inspire me, and sometimes that move me to tears, and I find a lot of that in literature personally, and I find it helps me reflect on life. So today's book is called If I Could Tell You Just One Thing by Richard Reed, and it covers advice from figures, leading figures, famous people around the world. In amongst the covers of this book, President Bill Clinton, Dame Judi Dench, Andy Murray, Caitlyn Jenner, the Dalai Lama, Annie Lennox, Sir David Attenborough, James Corden, Joanna Lumley, Stephen Fry, and so many more. And the thing for me is there's always a story in there, there's always something in there, there's always a lesson you can learn from somebody else's advice. Now, advice can be taken or left, and often it is, with consequences, but I find it really useful to look at other people's lives, leaders, managers, actors, people from the arts, and just look at some of the tips and the guidance that they offer to other people, to followers, to observers, to listeners. And this book is a treasure trove. So if you're working busy shifts and you want to just read something in between shifts, just to kind of trigger, support, and provoke your thinking, this is one of those books that can do it. It's pick up and put down, and I'm just going to cover three of them, three examples from this booklet, and read you a little bit from them, and hopefully you'll find the same kind of support and thinking material in these books, so that you can sit back and reflect, whether you're working on shifts or when you get 5 minutes over a coffee, just to think about how these issues and these mindsets link back to formal leadership, or the work that you're going to do to kind of go ahead and prepare yourself for promotion. So the first one that I've picked out for me is Terry Waite. Terry Waite was held hostage for 5 years in the Lebanon in 1980s. Some of you may remember this being covered on the news, and he'd gone there as the Church of England's envoy to negotiate the release of existing prisoners. He describes his 4 years of solitary confinement in a tiny windowless cell chained to a wall. He had been refused pen, paper, books, any communication without the world, and he never saw another human face for 4 years because he was required to put a blindfold on by his kidnappers. The book describes him as the human manifestation of what it means to be humble, to serve, and to sacrifice, because he had put himself in harm's way in the hope that he could help others. And 25 years later, he's still working tirelessly to help people who have had family members taken hostage. So, you know, there's part of the measure of the man there. And if you look at some of the questions that are raised in the book that were asked to him by Richard Reed, so how does one cope with 4 years of entirely unjust and unrelenting solitary confinement? And I find that question quite topical today, because we're in a pandemic and some people are having difficult experiences mentally, and so this is the kind of material, the kind of experiences, the kind of advice that can provide support just for thinking, or certainly to look at how other people dealt with it. So in response to that question, Terry Waite replied, "I did my best to structure each day. I would allocate a period of time to doing my exercises, and then I would write for an hour or two in my head, and then I'd do some mental arithmetic, and I spent a lot of time dreaming up poetry too, and then it would be time for some more exercises," and so on. So everything he did was in his head or as a result of mental creativity. And his observation there is, you know, the whole experience wouldn't have been so bad if they'd just let me have some books. So given that, what is his best advice for how to approach life? Well, it's the same lesson that I learnt in that cell. What you have to do is live for the day, that day. You have to say, now is life, this very moment. It's not tomorrow, it's not yesterday, it's not now. So you have to live it as fully as you can and invest in every day. So that's one I found quite inspirational to read and to cover. And the next one I'm going to cover quickly is Esther Perel, who is an advisor, an American advisor on human relationships and intimacy, and she often sells out her speaking events. And she offers advice here in relation to human relationships, and that comes from how she was drawn to studying people and relationships in the first place. And she says, my interest in people, in humanity, in the way people live, whether they create a life of meaning or not, it goes back to my two parents who were Holocaust survivors. They both spent 4 years plus in the concentration camps, and they came out with nothing. All they had was themselves, their sense of decency, and their relationship. And that is what endured. And my dad said that was all that mattered. And her father's wisdom echoes in the advice that she leaves for people in the book by Richard Reed. And this is it. The quality of your life ultimately depends on the quality of your relationships. Not on your achievements, not on how smart you are, not on how rich you are, but on the quality of your relationships, which are basically a reflection of your sense of decency, your ability to think of others, your generosity. Ultimately, at the end of your life, if people commend you, they'll say what a wonderful human being you were. And when they talk about the human being that you were, it won't be the fact that you had a big bank account. It really won't. It will be about how you treated the people around you and how you made them feel. And that is a really powerful piece of advice for people, particularly if you're going to be going into formal leadership positions. If you're seeking promotion or promotions, certainly to senior rank, you'll work at the lower ranks developing your technical skills and ability. But when you start looking to advance through the ranks to from chief inspector and above, and some might argue earlier, then your ability and your interpersonal skills, your ability to build trust and relationships is what matters. So that's a little kind of pointer towards that, but ultimately those relationships may be how you are judged at the end of the day. And the third one I just want to cover from this book is a bit of squaddy banter with Corporal Andy Reid, and this is the one that really kind of resonated with me. And Andy Reid lost 3 of his limbs through an improvised explosive device in Afghanistan 10 days before the end of his tour. Then he starts this section of this book, or the chapter, you know, are my family jewels still intact? And that was the first question he had when he regained consciousness after the explosion. And he recounts the time his parents first came to see him in hospital after he was evacuated from Afghanistan, and finding their son in bed, missing both legs and an arm, and with one arm remaining in plaster. His dad, not knowing what else to do, patted Andy on the head, and he said, "I'm not a fucking dog, Dad." And as soon as I said that, we all burst out laughing, and we knew then it was going to be okay. So I quite enjoyed reading that, even though it's tragic, it's sad. It ultimately ends up positively, and it's a real example of what a resilience, focus, family relationships and support can really give you. And instead of being bitter, each year Andy celebrates the day of the explosion, and he calls it Happy Being Alive Day. And what a mindset that is. He's now a successful writer. He's opened a cafe and a bar in his local town. He's got married. He's in demand as a public speaker on coping with adversity. At the end of the day, I think the most important thing he says is that don't look back on what has happened. Instead, look forward to what you can do. Just crack on. And his final comment underlies the benefit of his approach in the most indelible way. You know, if somebody said to me tomorrow, "Andy, do you want your legs back and the life that you were living before?" I'd say, "No thanks. I'm happier as I am now." And that for me is a really powerful story of mindset and focus and resilience. And this book is just jam-packed. Some of them not as powerful as that, but in terms of food for thought, for material for you to develop some thinking, to reflect on other people's experiences, and to ultimately weigh the advice that they leave for us or offer us. It's a fantastic book if you're going to spend some money on that. So that's If I Could Tell You Just One Thing by Richard Reid, and I'll be back with another book review shortly.